Whenever there was like a problem, like there'd be a little argument or some kind of an anti-Trump person, you don't see that much. I don't want to bring it on, but you don't see it much anymore. You know what? It's dangerous. It's dangerous with it.
Another Trump campaign rally where the president celebrates violence and goes down an ugly road on a number of levels.
Oh, it was really something last night.
And it was a super spreader event.
It was a super spreader event, but that's what he does, and people obviously like to go out and risk their lives, and that's, of course, their choice. It's a free country. But, Willie, of course, we're going to be showing some clips where the president makes comments that...
Oh, my God.
Oh, I don't know. We won't call them fascist comments, and
look at these people squashed together.
That it's what autocrats do and say, but it is what autocrats do and say when you're once again glorifying violence. And as the president's long done, celebrated the fact that people could get hurt in their rally if they exercise their First Amendment rights. And of course, later on in the rally, the president basically said a member of Congress was not an American. Mm-hmm. That, the whole, how is her country doing? Why is she telling us what to do in our country?
Oh, my God.
I'm sorry. If that's not what fascists do, I would love for a professor or somebody who studies fascism to let us know if that is not the practice of fascist leaders, and if Donald Trump may not be trying to imitate them and whipping his crowds into a frenzy.
Yeah, we're going to walk through all those clips, but you're right. Rarely do you see bigotry so explicit as it was in that one moment last night from Donald Trump talking about a sitting member of Congress who came to America as a refugee as a child. We'll get into that. Mika touched on those pictures we saw, totally flaunting, all of the guidance from the CDC, all of the guidance from his own doctors about distancing, about masks. There are a handful of masks in there. Obviously, the people behind him had masks on, as they've done before at these events.
Not all of them.
And then, as you say, glorifying violence, celebrating injuries suffered by a colleague of ours, a reporter, who was shot in the knee with rubber bullets. Again, celebrating that, drawing large cheers from the crowd. So he has created this culture where those kind of things, using bigotry against a sitting member of Congress, celebrating violence, and not wearing a mask are all celebrated at these rallies.
Well, and listen, this is an issue, obviously, regardless of whether Donald Trump wins or loses this fall. This is a country that we have to look at and wonder how 40, 45%, 46% of Americans cheer and laugh and celebrate when a member of the press gets hurt or anybody gets hurt. Actually, it's not just members of the press. He's long talked about beating up people or carrying people out on stretchers at rallies who, again, exercise the First Amendment rights that Hamilton and Madison and Washington and soldiers and sailors and Marines have fought for 240 years. And he's up there talking about a strong man from South America, mocking outsiders, suggesting again that a refugee that came to America to live the American dream and then became a member of the United States Congress is not an American. She shouldn't tell us what to do with our country. Again, I'm just underlining this before we start. I know he throws a lot of things at the wall all the time. But again, that doesn't mean we shouldn't stop every day and call fascism fascism. Now, again, if you don't think this is fascism, if you don't think this is how autocrats try to whip crowds into a frenzy, let us know. I mean, maybe we'll have a discussion about it on the show. But it certainly is what I've read throughout my life, certainly does look that way from here and looks that way to many Americans.
He's making all these people sick. Along with Joe, Willie, and me, we have MSNBC contributor Mike Barnicle. MSNBC national affairs analyst, co-host of Showtime's The Circus, and executive editor of The Recount, John Heilemann. Politics and journalism professor at Morgan State University, politics editor at The Grio, and an MSNBC political contributor, Jason Johnson joins us. And NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent and host of Way Too Early with Casey Hunt.
So, John Heilemann, let me just ask you: Are we being hyperbolic here? A president talking about violence, celebrating the fact that if somebody dissented, that it would be dangerous for them, and laughing and drawing cheers for the shooting of a member of the Free Press who was where he was supposed to be legally, but got shot by a rubber bullet, and the cheering that he was in extreme pain and misery, and also declaring that a refugee that came to this country was somehow not a member of this country. I mean, let's listen to this bite where the president basically says that a member of Congress is not a member of our country because she's not white.
You know AOC? Not a good student, not good at anything, but she's got a good line of crap, I'll tell you that. He's got a hell of a line. And she's got him, you know, she's radical left, but she's not as bad as some of them. How about Omar of Minnesota? We're going to win the state of Minnesota because of her, they say. She's telling us how to run our country. How did you do where you came from? How is your country doing? They're going to tell, she's going to tell us, she's telling us how to run our country.
She's telling us how to run our country as if it's not her country because, like Donald Trump's mother and like Donald Trump's grandparents, she was an immigrant to the United States of America. So, John Heilemann, before we get to the top of the news, I mean, tell me if it's hyperbole or if this is not, again, what fascist leaders have done throughout the decades.
Not hyperbole. Good morning, Joe. Good morning, Mika. Good morning, Willie, and everybody else. Not hyperbole, and I think all of us. The sad part about this is not that it's not only is it not hyperbolic, but this is not like the first time. You know, the whole reason why I think we all of us who were reluctant to use this kind of language, even after seeing Donald Trump do a lot of very disturbing things in the 2016 campaign. I speak for myself, and I think for a lot of other people, you know, you didn't want to go to leap to notions of fascism, to the kinds of language that now not only seems not hyperbolic, but seems inevitable, like unavoidable. You can't, it's all like all the same, there are all these other labels, right? Xenophobic, racist, demagogic, all of those things, you know, are things that we are reluctant to apply to any politician. But Trump has been so consistently all of those things: racist, sexist, xenophobic, autocratic, and fascistic for so long now that even everyone who's kind of resisted that language, now it's not even that you apply it reluctly. You apply it because there are no other words, and he's done it so often just with these women. Just with the women he's citing right here, with AOC, with Congresswoman Omar, with Congressman Tlaib, with the squad who he has chosen to demonize from the moment that these women got elected. He's done this, again, this is not the first time he's done it with them. They're some of his favorites. And Joe, to your point at the top, you know, the thing that is so disturbing about the entire thing is not that Donald Trump is a fascist and not that Donald Trump is an aspiring autocrat, but is that the response to all of that has only gotten more intensely positive in his crowd. Right. And whether Donald Trump wins or loses this fall, those people and those views that they cheer and they embrace in Donald Trump, that slice of the electorate will still be here. And that is why I keep saying over and over again, the man is dangerous, but he is a symptom and not a cause.
Well, but there have been spineless Republicans who have allowed this to go. Many would argue that we have been too unreluctant to call this out, too unreluctant to be more than shocked, but to act in a specific way. People in the administration, Republicans in Washington, you know, those who have emigrated here from tyrants, fleeing tyrants, Joe, they have been saying all along exactly what this looks like. And quite frankly, for years, it was, oh, come on. Oh, come on. No, he just says what he thinks. He doesn't mean it. Oh, come on. Mark my words. He means it. And he doesn't care that he is standing up on a stage far away from hundreds, possibly thousands of people that will die because they came to the event, or someone else will because they will pass the coronavirus. He doesn't care. That's another mark of a behavior of someone like a fascist or a tyrant or an autocrat who makes it all about themselves, who wants to change this country into a dictatorship. Does it sound crazy? It shouldn't, because that's where we are.
And of course, that's where, of course, he'd love to go there. I think even people that vote for him know that Donald Trump would knock down the walls of any constitutional checks and balances, would run through any Madisonian checks and balances if America's institutions had not held him in check for the most part over the past 3.5 years. He has become a president who governs by gesture because he can't use normal constitutional means to achieve any of his objectives. A day doesn't go by where a federal judge doesn't overturn one of his more extreme rulings.
Right.
Jason, we have, you know, after Charlottesville, after, I think it was maybe last summer, I think is when the president told the squad to go back home or whatever, you know, again, just pure fascist rhetoric. And yes, everybody's called it out before. It does seem to be more extreme now, and of course, it is clearly fascist language. But Jason, can we just step back for a second, because everybody's focusing on what's coming up in 5 or 6 weeks, and can we just talk about what's going to happen over the next 5 or 6 years, or the next 5 or 6 decades? America is going to cease to be a majority white nation. And if the Republican Party had any interest in being a part of that nation, and not just turning into a modern-day equivalent of the Whigs, they would have figured out a better way to not present themselves as racists, to not present themselves, their president at least, as fascists, telling refugees and others to get out of the country, or that they're somehow not a member of this country. That's the thing about it, is yes, it is terrible, and yes, I will say it. It is evil, and yes, I'll say it. I've never heard another American politician talk like this before Donald Trump. But it's also stupid and short-sighted, because a hard rain is going to fall on this Republican Party even in 4 years, because the demographic changes are sweeping Texas, Georgia, Arizona, Florida, other states. The Republicans probably not going to ever win again, especially with this kind of rhetoric. This is their last shot.
Well, so a couple things, Joe. I got to point out, John was talking about this before. Lots of people were saying this was going to happen. In particular, right. Journalists of color were screaming about this in 2015, that this man wanted to be an autocrat and that he was a white nationalist. And I want to be clear, we've had plenty of presidents and politicians who are racist. A white nationalist is different. A white nationalist is someone who says, I don't want anyone who's not white to be in control of the levers of government or policy or economics or education. He was a white nationalist. We've been calling it for years. And I want to put this in context, Joe. I'm glad that you're starting talking about fascism. I'm going to share a little story. In the early 2016,
wait.
I was
hold on. Hey, Jason, I just need to stop you for 1 second. Yes. Black journalists were saying it. White journalists were also saying it. Hispanics were also saying it. In early December, after Donald Trump talked of his Muslim ban, in December of 2015, I actually asked, after saying I could never vote for a man like Donald Trump in December of 2015, I asked, is this what Germany looked like in 1933? Is that where we are now? Is this Germany? But see, that's the thing. We saw that. A lot of people saw that in 2015, but But I must tell you, in 2015, I never thought I would see the crowds of people cheering on language like that.
That's just stunning.
That's what is still stunning to me today. Nothing about Donald Trump stunning. Those crowds cheering on fascist rhetoric, that's frightening.
So a couple things about that, Joe, and I'm glad that you mentioned Germany because that's where I was starting. In 2016, I was on a speaking tour with the German consulate, going around the country talking about the 2016 election. I was talking sort of a German equivalent of NPR and Frankfurt, and everybody was asking me, is he going to get elected? Is he going to get elected? The Germans were really, really worried. There was an older woman there, and I said, look, the numbers say probably not, you know, et cetera, et cetera. I said, he says these really crazy racist things. It seems unlikely. The Electoral College doesn't work in his favor. And the oldest woman in her room, who was in her 80s, said, we were saying the same thing about Hitler in the 30s in Germany. So you're right, Joe. I mean, I was across the ocean and had Germans saying, I can't believe you Americans don't see that this is coming. And I think the most worrisome part that I have to say in all of this is, you're right. Yeah, there were people who called it out. There were black people who called it out, Latinos who called it out, Asians who called it out. I think it took too long for many members of the press to accept that. And people who were saying it in 2015 were sometimes called, you know, you're being hyperbolic, you're using extreme language, it won't get that bad, other people will keep them in control, and that's why we're where we are today.
Well, I think, and that really is right now the question, Mika, and we'll go on to our news, but the question is, how long do the institutions hold up if Donald Trump is reelected? That's really the question here. Again, the federal judiciary has done a pretty exemplary job of holding Donald Trump's worst instincts in check. The press, the investigative core of the press, they've done an exemplary job in many ways as well. But where he breaks through these norms and where polite society is not allowed to say, he's talking the way fascists talk, that's where there is a concern. And I will say, again, I have long had faith in the institutions of this country to hold Donald Trump in check. I believe the institutions of this country have done a good job, for the most part, other than the spineless Congress, the spineless United States Senate, of holding this man in check and his worst autocratic fascist instincts. Yeah. I think, though, what Masha Gessen has said, what Ann Applebaum has said, what Jay Rosen has underlined at NYU is the fact that we haven't been as good in the media of moving beyond our current political lexicon, the language, the boundaries of debate that we've used over the past 240 years, because we've never had a president that's spoken like this.
With a complicit Congress, with a complicit AG.
With a complicit Congress, yes.
This is the difference.
And with a complicit administration.
Yeah, and a complicit. This has been a perfect, horrific storm in a number of different ways. And I think the, conversations we will have long after this, hopefully, if this country survives it,
we'll
dead
survive
serious.
We'll survive it.
Will be fascinating. I want to get to Willie, but just to add to this, because we're about to get to the new cases and positivity rates of the coronavirus. Willie, I just think, to add to what Joe was saying, the one thing that may get through to fervent Trump supporters, and I mean Republicans in Washington, members of his administration, and the people you saw at those rallies, is science. There will be people who get the coronavirus at the rate these numbers are going, whether it's family members or whatever, and it's going to be a clear view of the president said one thing on stage. It's practically non-existent to losing a family member. It may come down to science that shakes people to see that perhaps he doesn't have the country's best intentions in mind.
Well, we certainly really don't want that to happen.
No.
And that's why it pains us when we see people crowded in together without masks.
It's horrific.
It is horrific and it's frightening.
It's grotesque.
And we pray We pray for even, for the people that were there last night. We pray for their health, the health of them, the health of their families, the health of their children, the health of their parents and grandparents, the health of, we pray for all of those people who, I will say, we believe are being terribly misled.
Yes.
Well, the problem is with President Trump's encouragement, it's become a badge of honor now to attend these rallies, to not wear a mask. We heard in Ohio 2 nights ago when the lieutenant governor was holding up the mask, he was booed. That's because Donald Trump has created a culture where this has become sort of a middle finger to who? To doctors, to science, to whoever it is that Donald Trump has told them is the bad guy in all of this. And one of the reasons this is increasingly concerning is because the new cases and positivity rates of coronavirus are continuing to rise at concerning rates. The Washington Post analyzed public health data, found 27 states and Puerto Rico have shown an increase in the 7-day average of new confirmed cases since the final week of August. Minnesota, Montana, Oklahoma, Puerto Rico, Wisconsin, Wyoming, and Utah set record highs Monday for their 7-day averages. Before President Trump held that rally at the Pittsburgh International Airport last night in front of a densely packed crowd, as you can see in this photograph, the president said this at the White House.
Why haven't you said anything about the U.S. hitting 200,000 deaths?
Go ahead. Anybody else?
The grand milestone today of 200,000 deaths to the virus. What do you want to say to the American people?
Well, I think it's a shame. I think if we didn't do it properly and do it right, you'd have 2.5 million deaths. If you take a look at alternatives, you could have 2.5 million deaths or something thereabouts. You could have a number that would be substantially more, but it's a horrible thing. Should have never, ever happened. China let this happen, and just remember that.
So Mike Barnicle, the president, saying, quote, it's a shame. China should have never let this happen, creating a number, 2.5 million, pulling that out of thin air and comparing it to the 200,002 deaths that you now see at the bottom of your screen and saying, well, in comparison to that, it's not so bad. The president is doing more than wanting to always play it down, as he told Bob Woodward. He's ignoring it, literally, in the case of that first question, ignoring the question of what he would say to the 200,000 families who are suffering right now.
What could he say? It's my fault. I choked. I didn't do my job. He's not going to say any of that, will he? I have to tell you, the last 20 minutes of this conversation is both enlightening and depressing at the same time. But it's a conversation that I think the nation has to have going on until November and maybe even beyond. And it is the realization that everything we heard this morning, every snippet we heard from Donald J. Trump, the President of the United States, is further indication and proof that he has changed our country. He has changed our country for the worse. Now, whether it's irreparably changed, we're going to find out as time goes on. But everything he has touched, everything he has spoken about, he has altered reality. And it's not just the 200,000 deaths. He has managed to take the fact that more than 200,000 people are dead from a virus that he didn't know how to wage war against, and knocked it down in terms of people's focus. Because he talks about the Supreme Court. He talks about Congresswoman Omar from Minnesota. He talks about things like that to get people off the track, and sometimes we follow him off the track. But in addition to the 200,000 deaths, there are millions of people today, families today, fractured economically because the United States Congress, specifically the United States Senate, the Republicans in the United States Senate, will not bail them out when they're drowning economically right in front of them. So the country has indeed changed. And whether it's unalterably changed, we're going to find out. But it sure is depressing.
And if you look at the election results, since Donald Trump got into office, whether it was 2017 with those incredibly long lines in Virginia, with women standing in line all day, the vote against Donald Trump in the form of Ed Gillespie, or what you saw in special elections in Alabama, what you saw in the historic landslide victories for Democrats in 2018 as Donald Trump tried to use racism and bigotry and caravans and diseased immigrants and diseased refugees against the Democrats. That didn't work. There was a landslide victory there. We saw the same thing in 2019. Democrats winning governorships in Louisiana and Kentucky. And if you look at the polls now, Casey, it doesn't look like it's working now. And yet the president's doubling down. He's tripling down on this sort of logic, on this sort of campaigning that appeals, we still believe, to a minority of the country, to maybe 40% of the country, 41% of the country, 42% of the country. But I will say, yes, as early as December 2015, I was asking if this is what Nazi Germany, or what Germany looked like in 1933 before the rise of Hitler. But at the same time, I never imagined that my Republican Party, would fall in line behind a man like this who continues to use fascist language. And yet, there they are, silent, no protests, going along for the ride.
I mean, I've lost count of the number of times and the number of issues and the number of comments that I have asked Republican senators on the Hill about. It feels like it's something new every day, and the reaction is almost always the same, with a handful of exceptions. The one thing I will say, and I'm with Mike in terms of it feeling depressing, but there are a couple things. First of all, let's remember that Hillary Clinton did, in fact, win the popular vote. There were more people that voted for her than voted for Donald Trump. So that says that there are Americans who saw what Donald Trump said, saw that language, and said, you know what, this is not for me. And the second thing is that when Mitt Romney lost Michigan in 2012, he did it with more votes than the votes that Donald Trump got in Michigan, and he won in Michigan, which also tells me that there are a lot of Republicans out there that also, don't like this language, that reject it. A lot of Republican voters. And I do think that the most important thing for Americans today is, if this is not the country they want, if living in this is not what they want, then the majority of those people should actually show up to the polls. It's going to be harder than ever because of the pandemic, because of the coronavirus.